Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. It is a beautiful spring day in Nagambie and I've got myself holed up in my sewing room again. Today we're going to make another boxed bag. This one is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to have a diagonal zip going across the front of the bag. It'll kind of look like the Dopp style bags, but it'll have a diagonal zip on it and it'll be cute, I promise. Come along and I'll show you how we put this together. Here's what we need. This is going to be our outer fabric. We want a piece that is 23 inches by 15 inches. That's to start with. We'll be cutting it back to size later. So 23 by 15 for the main fabric. For the lining, we want two pieces that are 12 inches by 15 inches. Today I'm using 100% quilting cotton throughout this project. For the handle, I need 4 inches by 12 inches. I need a zip that is at least 14 inches long. This is a regular dress zip, 35 centimeters or 14 inches. We want two pieces of fabric for the zipper tabs. These are 1.5 inches wide by 4 inches long, and they're wider than the zip, so that's fine. They can be trimmed back later. If you're using a continuous zip, say a number 5 perhaps, then the fabric here will be wide enough for that as well. And you want a piece of Palin or lightweight fusible stabilizer of some kind. This is 12 inches by 15 inches. It's for the inside of the handle. And then we want a piece of batting. I'm using the same kind for the handle and the main bag, which is 22 inches by 14 inches. Now the piece of batting needs to be cut at exactly 22 inches by 14 inches. And I'll have the metric conversions on the screen now. Now it doesn't matter what type of stabilizer you use. If you want to have a bag that is soft but still has a bit of body, then use a lightweight Palin or a fleece or batting. And if you want something that's got more rigidity in it, then you can use a Decaville or something like, or Peltex perhaps. Okay, we are going to work from this piece of stabilizer now. Doesn't matter whether you work with the fusible side or the main side, it's whatever side you can actually make a marking on. Let's fold this in half and find the center. And I'm going to mark that with a pen at both sides. I've drawn a line down the center. What we're going to do is shape our bag. From this top middle section here, we need to measure out 7 inches. So I've got my 7-inch mark lined up on that line I've drawn. And I'm just going to mark 7 inches at the top here, and on the bottom of the fabric here I'm also going to mark 7 inches on the opposite side. So at the bottom there's 7 inches and at the top is 7 inches from the center. Take the top corner here and from the very corner down to that 7-inch mark, we're going to make a line. I would normally go and just cut this out on the fabric. And on this side, at the bottom, from the corner, we're going to come in to the top at that 7-inch line. So you can see we've got our straight center line here and we've got two diagonal lines following in the same direction on the sides. We can cut that straight out. Okay, there's the shape of our bag. So I'm going to show you how this will look. We've got the centre in there. This piece of fabric will wrap over like that, and this one will wrap over like that, and we'll have our zip on the diagonal like that. So that's basically how the bag's going to look. It's pretty simple, isn't it? So take your outer piece of fabric, place it wrong side up, and we can take our batting with the fusible side down. So I've got the bumpy bits which I'm facing down. And you want to have your fabric at least 1/2 inch bigger all the way around the pallin. We can go and fuse the pallin and the fabric together now. I'm also going to take my handle fabric and fuse the pallin onto the centre as well. So if you fold this in half and then fold the raw edges in on both sides, open it out, and you can place your pallin directly over the centre there, fuse that in place. Then we can fold that in half, fold the edges over, and then we'll fold it over again. I'll go and press these quickly. Okay, I have pressed the pallin into the middle of the handle fabric, and I've also pressed the edges over and then folded that over again. And I'll just keep that clipped in place for the time being. We'll take it to the machine soon, and we're going to sew down both long edges of the fabric. We don't need to worry about the raw edges at the end. We can take our lining pieces, the 12 inch by 15 inches. These are the wrong sides, that's the right side. So we'll place right side together, and what we're going to do here is close up part of one side. Normally when we're making bags, we'll do this as one of the last steps, but we're going to do this in the first step today. So from the outside edge in, we'll do a back stitch here, back stitch there, leave about 6 inches open here, back stitch, and then go to the end and back stitch. My entire project is going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way through. So that's what we're going to do on here as well. If you choose to have a different seam allowance, that's completely up to you, because our pallin is already cut out to the stitching line. Let's take this to the machine and we'll sew that section closed. While I'm at the machine, I'm going to prepare my zip as well. So let's get rid of all the tabs. I have my 2 end tabs here. I'm going to cut the metal bar off the end. And fold the fabric right side together and place that over the end of the zip. Open the zip on this side. Line up those 2 metal clamps there, and we can cut off the end of the zip before the metal. Grab some tape, place that on the end of your tab, and then take the other piece of fabric, fold that in half right side together, place that on the end, and we'll take that to the machine as well. We'll double stitch over the section where the teeth are. While we're at the machine, we will also sew the handle. So we'll go down one side and then come back down the other side. So we can take that, and our lining over to the machine now. I'll start off with the tabs. Next is the handle. I'll do both sides of the long edges. Now my handle has started bunching up and twisting, so I'm going to undo this stitching and use some double-sided tape that'll prevent the fabric from shifting. So I've just gone and run a strip of double-sided tape to the inside edge. Hopefully that will stop the top layer of fabric from pushing forward. If you have a walking foot, that will really help as well, because that'll help feed the fabric more evenly. I don't have one for this machine. That worked much better that time. And the last one we'll do for now is sew that lining closed just at the top and bottom edges. And remember to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you may have noticed when we're at the machine that when I sewed the first row, this started to twist a little bit. If you sew in one direction and then go back up and sew in exactly the same direction, you won't have that twisting happening. But it does tend to happen more often if you come down this end and then go up that end. It'll just skew the fabric a little bit. So to avoid that, come down both sides in the same direction. Our zipper tab is done. All you need to do now is take the fabric and push it away from the zip, and the ends are nice and secure. You can remove that piece of tape that's there and your zip's nice and neat, and the slider's not going to come off. The length here can be trimmed off at the end, but these side bits we can now trim to the same size as the width of the zipper tape. And our lining, this is where we've got the opening in here. We can open this out. It's up to you if you want to finger press the seam open or press it to one side. I usually decide at the end when I'm putting the bag together what I'm going to do. So let's fold it to both sides. Then we have a crease in this section here where the opening is going to be. That'll make it easy to see when we close the bag up after. Now we're going to place our lining fabric right side up. There's my opening in the middle there. Take your main fabric and we'll place that right side down with the pellin faced up. Now I have a confession to make. My lining piece wasn't quite wide enough for the width of the bag, so I have had to go and add another strip of fabric just along the top edge here. It's not going to do any harm. It's on the lining, it won't be seen, and it's in the area where you have the boxing on the sides. It's just one of those days. Line up the fabric layers. We've got the right side up of our lining, right side down of our main, which has had the pellin fused onto it. I'm hoping you can see that faint outline of purple right on the very edge of the pellin. That is going to be our stitching line throughout this project. Now I said that I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so what I'm going to do is line up the 1/2 inch line on the edge of my pellin here, and I'm going to mark in my seam allowance. The reason I'm marking in the seam allowance here is just so that you can see where we're actually going to be cutting the fabric. So now that I've got the outline 1/2 inch away from the pellin, I'm going to cut this straight out. Remember, we've got the 3 layers, we've got the 2 fabric layers with our stabilizer. Okay, this is our finished pattern. We still need to box the corners, of course, but we will worry about that once we've put the zip in and started shaping the bag. Let's take the main fabric and we're going to place the zip down. At this stage, it doesn't matter whether you have the slider on the left or the right, because the bag will be the same on both sides. It won't matter until we put the handle in place. Fold the fabric in half and we'll find the centre. We don't want to fold the fabric in half this way. We actually want to fold this corner up to that corner. That's my centre there. And I'll do the same on this piece, on this side. And we'll find the centre of the zip. Line up the zipper tape and then find the centre, make a mark. And I'm going to use my double-sided tape here. Take the zip and place the bumpy side faced down, finding the centre markings, and line that up with your centre marking on your fabric. And run the zip right across. That side's done, and we need to now place the lining on top. So we'll run another row of tape directly over the top. And we'll place the lining right side together. Find the centre of your lining in the same way that we found the main fabric centre. And line that up. And now we can go to the machine and sew all the way down this edge here. Once we've done that, we'll open it out, bring the lining and the main to the same side, and then you'll go and top stitch along here. We're going to top stitch just between the area where the zipper tape is, not as far as the tabs. I'm just going to be sewing very close to the bump on the zipper teeth with the where the position of the zip is right now. It's actually sitting a little bit further out from the wadding or the pellin. Don't forget to move the slider out of the way when you get to it. Now that that's done, we'll open out the fabric. Just finger press the seams away from the zip on the lining and on the main. Turn it right side up. Make sure you've got your lining sitting behind your main fabric, and also double check that the lining is sitting away from the edge of the zipper tape as well. We're going to top stitch from the end of the zip, not from the end of the tab, to the other end of the zip as well. Next, we're going to turn the fabric around with the right side facing up, and then we'll run some double-sided tape along the top edge of that fabric. Bring the zip up in line with the fabric again, and remember to line up the marking that you've got on the zipper tape and on the centre of your fabric. You'll see that the fabric doesn't want to line up along the zipper edge, but you'll just have to manipulate it so that it does. It doesn't matter whether you run the tape along the edge of your zipper tape or on the edge of your fabric, but there's more stability in the tape, so that's why I'm using that. Okay, we'll take that back to the machine and stitch that down. After that, we'll turn it around and we'll top stitch. So this one looks a little bit more awkward. It looks like it's not lined up, but it is actually fine. When you're sewing the second side of the zip in place, you want to make sure that the lining is well out of the way of your stitching area. Once you've done that zip, we can turn this the right way around, and now you can see how it's starting to take shape. We still need to top stitch this last row. Open it out, and it's easier to top stitch when you've got the bag inside out. Take it back to the machine, making sure that the lining and the main fabric are away from the zipper tape, and go back to the machine, and you just have to manipulate the fabric out of the way and then start top stitching from the end of the zip all the way to the other end of the zip. And just double check that the lining fabric is behind your main fabric. Okay, the top stitching is done. What we can do now is get in between the layers and we can start shaping the bag. So get in between the lining and the main and turn that the wrong way round. Let's open the zip now before we forget. Separate the lining and the main. And remember when we marked the centre position earlier on our pallin, we want to continue that line on to the edge of our fabric, and we'll do the same along here. We need to have the centre marked on our main and our lining. Now the lining fabric, we have a seam at the bottom that we sewed up at the very beginning of this project. So we've got our centre line just there and again on the other side. This is where I extended my fabric because I didn't have enough. With your centre marked along the fabric here, we want to make sure that we have the same distance from here to the outside edge and from here to the outside edge. So measure that distance all the way across. And for mine, it's about 9¼ inches. Half of that is, we've got 4½ plus another 1/8. So 4 5/8 of an inch. That means we need to measure 4 5/8 of an inch from the centre line out, and that's our fold line on the side. Do the same on this side. I'll mark that with a pin just to help me see, and I'll just use that pin there to manipulate the fabric over, fold that down, and then double check the distance again. From the outside edge, I've got 4 5/8, and from the centre out, I've got 4 5/8 on this side. Once that's right, I can clip this in place so that it doesn't shift. Check the other side. I'm not worried about the lining for now. So double check that you've got the same distance from the edge of your main fabric to the centre and from the centre to the edge. We can flip that over, and with the lining we'll do the same thing. You can actually just eyeball this now because you'll know that the lining sides need to match up with the side of your outer fabric. But if you're more comfortable, you can do those measurements again. I'll just eyeball that. That'll sit nice and flat. What we need to do now is box our corners. So I'm just going to clip all of the layers of fabric together because it'll be easier to cut the corners out if everything is nicely lined up. When you're working out the box corners, you want to make sure that you don't cut into the area where the zip is. And remember that the zip isn't in the centre for this project. We've got one end of the zip over this side. We've got one end of the zip over this side. So you've got the diagonal there. And you want to make sure that when you're cutting out your fabric for your box corner that you don't actually intrude on that section there, because otherwise it's going to look a bit weird. It might muck up your zip too. We've got the fold of the fabric on both sides and we've got the raw edges here. We need to make sure we take our seam allowance into account. So you can see the pallin I've got on the very side edge here. That's my stitching line. And the fold of the fabric is the same as your stitching line. Okay, so that's where the fabric ends and the fabric ends here on the fold. What I'm going to do is measure 1½ inches from the folded edge, and from the edge where the pallin ends is where I'm taking my next measurement. So this is a 1½ inch boxed corner. I have a bunch of my own templates just made out of template plastic. So that's 1½ inches there. The easiest thing to do when you decide what size you want is to just place that template in the area that you want to cut out. Saves having to measure every single time. And now we need to cut out these boxes. So I've got all the layers together, the lining and the main. Keep it nice and even. Now that the boxed corners are all cut out, we need to sew up the side seam. We don't want to sew the lining and the main together at this stage. In the section where the zip is on the diagonal, we're only going to sew that 1/2 inch seam allowance over the edge of the zipper tape. We need to still be able to get in and manipulate this fabric underneath after. So that is the only section on this side where we have the lining and the main stitched together. The rest of it we're going to sew from here down just for the main, and for the lining we'll also sew all the way down on the side there. So at the zipper section we just want to sew that small piece. The main and the lining will sew those two sections separately, and then come back up this side and just finish stitching the main separately and the lining separately. You can just move it out of the way so that you can sew each side. For the other side, you'll do exactly the same thing. You only want to sew just in the area where the tab is. So the main separately, the lining separately, come back and do the main and lining separately on these short edges. And I'll fold the top layer away again, line up those edges. And we will sew all the way up to the beginning of that stitching we did earlier. Flip it upside down and repeat. And then we'll turn that around and do the same for the other side. You just push the fabric away as far as you can from the edge of the zip, and then you can get in with your stitches really close. Before I go and finish up the boxing, I'm going to get in there and just double check my zip was open for a start, but also just double check that everything looks all right on the side seams. And so far everything's looking pretty good. Take your handle, and what we're going to do is place the handle on the side where our zip starts. So if your zipper is closed, we want to place the handle on the end where the zip closes. Separate the lining from the main fabric. Place the handle directly over the center seam there. Line up the handle of your bag on the very edge there and have that centered over that side seam. Take the other end of the handle, keeping it nice and flat, and place that over the other side. I've got my seam pressed to one side, and center that evenly. So there's our handle, our zip is on the left, and when we open it, we can open from left to right. Make sure your zip is open here. We're going to go back inside the bag, turn everything around. Just be careful you don't move the handles. And your handles want to be sitting on the inside of the bag now. And you can see where they're clipped together on one side. Spread out that fabric. Keep the handle in line there. Reposition your clips. Repeat for the other side. And we'll repeat that for the other end. And for the lining, you'll be doing exactly the same. I'm occasionally asked, why do I do my box corners at this position or that position, or even at my machine? It's usually dependent on the project that I'm doing. If I'm batch sewing, then I'll do them at the machine. For this particular project, it was easier to do the boxing after putting the zip in and turning it the right way around than doing a cutout on the pattern, because the first one I did ended up all wrong. And because we're working with a diagonal zip, it's easier to actually get the measurements right once you've done all of those bits. Now we can go to the machine and sew up all these corners. For the entire bag so far, we've had the Palin as our seam guide, so we knew where to stitch. We've actually cut the Palin out to the same size as the fabric for this section. All I'm doing is using the 1/2 inch guide on my metal plate to help me get my 1/2 inch seam allowance. Double check that you've got no lining in the way as you start sewing. Backstitch over the area where the zipper tape is. Backstitch over the area where your handles are as well. I just want to reinforce that a couple of times. You get the idea of what I'm doing here. I won't bore you and make you sit there and watch every part of these corners. Once you have finished sewing up all those corners, we can go in and turn everything the right way around. Double check that everything looks nice before we go and close up that opening at the bottom. Stick your hand in there between the lining and the fabric, main fabric. Just push out all of those corners. I thought for a minute I made a huge mistake with the zip being all the way over here and nothing on this side. Once you're happy with your bag, take your lining fabric, pinch the edges of the lining, pinch them so that they sit taut. You can finger press that opening, and then we'll go to the machine. We're just going to close up that opening that we did earlier. And you don't need to see me do that. I think everybody gets that. I'll be back in a sec. And we are completely finished. So now you can just push the lining corners out. And there we have a different take on a boxed bag. Isn't that really cute with the diagonal zipper there? Something a little bit different from our regular bags. If you wanted to, you could make this much longer and it would be an ideal shoe bag or travel bag. This is an ideal cosmetic bag, toiletry bag. You can put all your underwear in there if you're going away on a holiday somewhere. You can have a whole heap of these little boxed bags. I think this is very cute. So how do you like that? I think this bag is absolutely adorable. I love the idea of the zip on the diagonal. It's been a project that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and I'll show you my first one that I did. It was a little bit of a fail. If you look at the side profile, it's a little bit smaller. The boxing is a different size. When I created the pattern for this one, I cut out the box corners on my pattern, then sewed everything up, and the corners were out of alignment. That was why in this one, I chose to do the boxing after the zip was in and everything was turned the way it was supposed to be. It was much easier to work out the box corners once most of the process was done than this one here. And there's a difference in the handles as well. I've used just the regular strapping that I usually use for my products. And you've got your handmade handles here, so it doesn't matter which one you go and use. If you don't want to put handles, you don't have to. Just put a couple of tabs at the end. But it's a pretty versatile bag, I think. What do you think of that? It's very pretty. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.